Hello everyone and welcome back to the tutorial series, and this is the final video in the series, for now at least, and it's going to be on subtitling. And much as with the other videos in this series, I'm going to start out with a fairly straightforward form of subtitling, and then I'll move into more advanced forms of subtitling, including the one way in which you can potentially do Jeffersonian transcription within Shotcut as a subtitle. So anyway, how do we do the basic subtitling first? Well, as you can imagine, as I've already shown in the previous video, if you watch that, it's going to involve this text filter. And so if we click on this, because we want to apply the text filter here, and what I find works with subtitling is, I'll just find the text filter first. In fact, I'll search for it. Again, you can scroll down if you want to find it, but I'll just search for it there. Okay, so we've now applied the text filter and we have the text filter box here. But what I find is that if you have a long chunk of data, it helps to apply the text filter and all the text filter settings on the large chunk of data and then just start filtering it down. Very, very similar to the point I made about anonymization, actually. If you apply the settings at the start, you then don't have to apply them to your individual chunks. So you can just apply them all at once and then start splitting and tweaking the settings for each individual segment. Okay, so here we have the text filter box, and you'll notice that by default it will show you a time code, although you can barely see it on this background. But we don't want a time code, we want to have subtitles. So what we can do, and these are the settings that work for me, feel free to play around with them, but what I tend to go with for the basic form of subtitling is I go into here, and I use this font here that I'm quite fond of. Still, I could have used the space between the last video and this one to actually look up how you say this, although looking up how a font name is pronounced really isn't a good way to spend one's time, I think. But yeah, well, however it's pronounced, Sego, Sego, however it's pronounced, that is one that I like. And yeah, regular and 32. Obviously, you can browse around and look at these different fonts. There are so many fonts in there. You can experiment with fonts that work for you. But I find Sego UI Black, regular, size 32 works for me. So apply that, and you'll, in fact, if I type something, you'll notice, you can't really see it very well, but you will notice that it's appeared huge and in the middle of the screen. And the reason for that, it hasn't applied our settings yet because we haven't ticked this box here. So we've got to tick this box that says use font size, and it applies our settings, and it moves. You really can't see it now, but that's going to change in a moment. But it has moved the text to the bottom of the screen. I'll just put some sample text here, text, and then we'll start fiddling with that later on. So what we need to do now is add an outline to make you can kind of see the lettering there against the armchair, but we need to add an outline to help the text stand out. And you can see the outline here. It's a black outline, which is definitely going to be useful on this kind of background, and it tends to work on any kind of background. In fact, let me just take off the sketch filter, because you might not even have the sketch filter on when you're doing subtitles. You see, even without the white background, the text, it's more readable than it was on the white background, but it still doesn't really stand out enough from the background, I would say. So what you want to do is click back on this, what you want to do is add an outline to help it stand out from the background. And what I find works with this font, at least, is a thickness of 3. So if we go to 3 thickness, that seems to me to strike a good balance between making it stand out a bit more, but not being so thick. Because if I just carry on going, you'll see, yeah, it starts to get too thick and it still starts to blur together. So 3 seems to me to stand out quite well, and I'll just put the sketch filter back on, and again, stands out very, very well against that background. And you can also move these around, so you can go vertical fit top. You can put them in the middle, although I don't know why you'd want the middle. But yeah, as far as putting them at the top, I think putting them at the top can be useful if you're presenting data in a room which doesn't have raised seating and there are quite a few people in there. It can be useful because obviously if you have the subtitles down here at the bottom of the screen, people might not be able to see them if there are other people's heads in the way. But I'm going to keep them down at the bottom just for the purposes of this video. I'm going to be a traditionalist. So those are the basic subtitle settings that you can use. Now, what else? How do we actually apply the subtitles to the video? I mean, that's the key point here, right? How do we actually? Because at the moment we just have text, and it's all across all of this chunk of video? Well, as you can probably imagine by now, it's going to involve the split at playhead function. So what you have to do, the basic principle of subtitling in Shotcut is you have to divide the video into chunks using split at playhead, and those chunks are defined by whatever happens to be said in a particular chunk. And then you have to alter the text here in the box. You have to alter that to reflect what's said in your chunk. And that sounds very, very complicated in the abstract, but it's actually quite simple in practice. So let me give you an example of this. So I'll play the first question or the first thing that I say at the beginning. I'm sorry, I forgot that this is supposed to be interviewer. I'm supposed to be neutral about this. I'll play the first thing the interviewer says at the beginning of the video.
These questions really just cover Dog, the history of Dog, and your own career within Dog.
So that sounds to me, I mean, it's something that you have to develop an instinct for, I suppose, and it's as you do subtitling, you will develop that instinct for what counts as a single chunk that you can have subtitles on screen for. And it's going to vary depending on things like how fast somebody is talking or what they're saying. You know, it's going to depend on factors like that. But I think, having listened to that is a good chunk that can be subtitled on its own. So what I do, as you can imagine by now, I right click here, I go down to split at playhead, and okay, so, and you'll notice actually when I did split at playhead, this is very important when subtitling, because this has caught me out many a time. When you do split at playhead, it will automatically outline in red the new chunk that's been created. But of course, you want to apply subtitles to the old chunk, so do remember to go back and click on that and click on the text again. And we can now type in what I said in that first chunk. So I think I said, so these questions really just cover, oh, I'll move this back so you can see it actually happening on screen, really just cover Dog, the history of, probably should, again, as I mentioned in the previous video, when I showed this text filter, you have to do manual line breaks. It won't do a line break for you. In fact, if you carry on typing the history of Dog Soft and your own career within Dog, it'll just start shrinking it down and become unreadable. So I think a good break point would be about there. Yeah, that works out quite well. And again, tap the enter key and made a line break there within Dog, and your own career within Dog. Dog. Okay, so there we go, and that is our first chunk of subtitle, and just to see if it works.
These questions really just cover Dog, the history of Dog, and your own career within Dog.
There we go. So yeah, it seems to have applied to that first chunk, but of course we shift back to text, the placeholder text for the second chunk, because again, once you've applied a split in the video, whatever you do in the first chunk does no longer affects the other chunks around it. So that is the basic principle. It really is as simple as that. You have to divide the video into these chunks and then apply the subtitles to each chunk. I'll just carry on a little bit further. I'm not going to do the whole video, but I'll just do a few more bits of talk just to illustrate these points. So if I play this bit,
and in a roughly chronological way as well.
So that sounds like another chunk, but you'll notice at the beginning there, I wasn't really saying anything. The interviewer wasn't really saying anything at all. It was just an in-breath and an and you may wish to subtitle that, you may not wish to subtitle that, but I will, for the purposes of this, just to illustrate the point, I will say that no, I don't want to subtitle that. I only want to subtitle things, full words, let's say. So what I would do here is I would separate out the that bit from the thing that I actually say, and this is how I do that. Okay, that's quite. The interviewer. I think it was about there. I mean, when it's actually playing back, you don't necessarily need to be 100% precise, because when it's actually playing back, the text is rolling out on screen, and people aren't really going to notice where the boundaries are with this much precision. But it's good to be as precise as you can, I suppose. So I don't want to subtitle anything in this chunk, so I go up here again and I just turn off the subtitle. I mean, I could also just delete the text, but best way of doing it, just turn off the subtitle, turn off the text filter, and so now for the silence. Yeah, sorry, there's a bit of a stutter on the video, but the point, it should have should have been clear there. There was a point where there were no subtitles on screen. And what do I say next?
And in a roughly chronological way as well. So
and you'll notice there, this is very illustrative, you'll notice there that Charles actually did a response token. He did an and so that'll illustrate how we can do, again, with this very, very basic form of subtitling, it'll illustrate how we can do overlaps. So
chronological way as well.
Oops, let me just go back and make sure I know what I said there.
In a roughly chronological way as well.
So that's another chunk in a roughly chronological way as well. So what I can do is type that, and what I would do for an overlap if I'm just doing basic verbatim sort of subtitles is I would just do a dash. So oops, again it's shifted this to the, so let me just put this, and in a roughly chronological way as well. And then we've got Charles's it sounds like an anyway. And again, that's another chunk of subtitling. I'll do one more, or maybe one or two more, just to highlight how this works. So
chronological way as well. So the logical place to start with that really is what were you doing before you came to Dog?
Yeah, that's quite a good point to actually. So that is a huge chunk, and I don't think that's all going to fit on screen at once. So again, you have to use, one has to use one's instincts to try and determine exactly which part needs to be, where the split actually needs to come in. And one function that is quite useful. So let's say that I put it here, and it turned out to be not quite right. You can, if you've made a mistake, I mean, of course you could use the undo function, but if you've made a mistake in Shotcut, you can also just you merge with the next clip and it remerges them back together. So you have to play around with the boundaries of subtitles sometimes. So I'll just have a go at this one.
The logical place to start with that really is what.
So I think the logical place to start with that probably is a good subtitle on its own, and then I can round out the rest of the question in the second chunk there. So let's try that.
So the logical place to start with that really is what.
Oops. Went a little bit too far there. Okay, that sounds about right. So again, we go to the text filter. So the logical place to start with that really, in fact I'm not going to do punctuation there. So the logical place to start with that really, and then in this one we would do, what do I say next?
What were you doing before you came to Dog?
Yeah, there we go. So is what were you doing before you came to Loughborough? Oops, again the playhead has shifted there. Keep forgetting to do that. Came to, again, finding these line breaks. Came to Loughborough before you came to Dog. And I think actually there's a little bit more space on that top row. Might even be able to squeeze Loughborough on that top row. That would be an achievement. It's a little bit, no, I think actually I'll go, I mean, you see, these are the sorts of decisions you have to make. I just wanted to do this just to illustrate these are the sorts of decisions that you have to make about where you're going to draw these boundaries. But yeah, so that is the basic principle of subtitling anyway. So you're breaking the video up into these chunks and you're applying your subtitles to each chunk. What's said in each chunk you're writing subtitles for. And that's how you do the basic verbatim sort of subtitles.